Thanks for taking the time to download this BBC Radio 5 Live podcast. To search for other podcasts you might like, click bbc.co.uk/5live, where you'll also find our terms of use.
The new climate assessment basically confirms what we knew before, that the climate is changing worldwide, climate being the long-term variations in weather, of course. But it's much more than that it's not just changing, it's the fact that changes are occurring because of human activities are becoming clearer and clearer over time. We now are beginning to even talk about that dangerous climate change isn't just going to happen in the future, it's happening now. We're seeing more and more concerns about severe weather.
Just summarise for us what the big changes are. What are we seeing and where?
So we're seeing overall the average long-term changes in temperature. We're seeing relatively small changes overall in precipitation. Some places getting drier, some places getting wetter. We often refer to the parts of the world, the wetter getting wetter and the drier getting drier. But it's much more than that. It's this concern about severe weather, where we're seeing much more concern about heat waves, less cold waves overall. We're also seeing more precipitation coming as much larger events than in the past. In Illinois, as an example, what used to be the 20-year storm is now becoming more like the 12-year storm. That's happening throughout most of the U.S. We're seeing it really throughout most of the world. When you do get precipitation, whether it's rain or snow, that it's more likely to come as a larger event. On top of that, we're seeing an increased incidence in some locations as a result in floods, and in some other locations, an increasing incidences of drought.
What do we think the drivers of this are?
The analysis are very clear that you cannot explain these long-term changes we're seeing as being due to natural causes. If anything, the solar output has decreased slightly over the last 3+ decades, not increased. The only thing that really is able to explain the observed changes is the fact that because of our burning of fossil fuels, other human-induced changes in our planet, that we're increasing the amount of carbon dioxide, the amount of methane, the amount of some other key gases. And those gases so happen are very important to life on Earth in the first place, because without those gases, we wouldn't have life here as we know it. This would be a frozen planet. And the reason they protect us is because of what's called the greenhouse effect, where they absorb the infrared radiation that is emitted from the Earth's surface that otherwise would go to space. So having those greenhouse gases is really important. The problem is because of human activities is we're increasing the amount of those greenhouse gases substantially. The amount of carbon dioxide, for example, has increased by about 40%, from about 280 parts per million to over 400 parts per million, and it continues to increase, and that's driving changes. And we haven't seen levels of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere of that size for over 2 million years. So this is pretty unusual.
Do we know what the weather was like 2 million years ago, when it was that high?
We don't totally know what the weather was, but we do know that it was a much, much warmer climate on this planet at that time than it is now. Those levels of 400 parts per million and above existed for thousands of years then, and when they did, it resulted in essentially ice-free poles. Places like Antarctica and Greenland were without ice, and it was much higher sea levels, much, much warmer planet than it is now. I think the long-term concern is that human activities are driving us back in that direction. We may not be worried about what's going to happen over the next several thousand years, but we certainly should be concerned about what's going to happen over this century when these changes in climate are going to be affecting our children and our grandchildren. We certainly don't want to leave them a legacy of much higher concern, not only about just warming temperatures, but about the increases in severe weather events that are likely to happen.
Now, obviously, 2 million years ago, the period you're referring to, there were early pre-humans around, but they certainly weren't emitting CO2 the way that we modern humans are now. So where did the CO2 that was in the atmosphere and at high level then come from?
Yeah, it's thought those high levels of carbon dioxide actually came from outgassing from very large volcanoes. The current volcanic eruptions have very small effects in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, much, much less than the human amount, and really do not contribute to the increase that we're